يديك لو أتيت مع قلة البضاعة أرتجي على بابك مولاي، لو أتيت مع قلة البضاعة أرتجي على بابك حسين، رغم ذنوبي يا مولاي، يا آخرتي ويا دنياي، ما واليت إمام سواكم، تشهد خطوات المشاية والله طمعت وعمد الراية، كيف أبيع العمر فداكم مولاي، رغم ذنوبي يا مولاي، يا آخرتي ويا دنياي، ما واليت إمام سواكم، تشهد خطوات المشاية والله طمعت وعمد الراية، كيف أبيع العمر فداكم حسين إلى كربلاء حسين
نادى الحسين مخضبا في كربلاء، حسن البلاء يا مليكا للسماء. نادى الحسين مخضبا في كربلاء، حسن البلاء يا مليكا للسماء. نادى الحسين مخضبا في كربلاء، حسن البلاء يا مليكا للسماء، حسن البلاء يا مليكا للسماء. خذني إليك على عجل، رمت الوصال ولم أزل رب العلا، رب العلا. أشتاق قربك سيدي، هبني اللقاء، أمسك يدي في كربلاء، في كربلاء. إني تركت الخلق طرا في هواك ربي، وأيتمت العيال لكي أراك، عهدا لئن قطعتني بالحب إربا، ربي لما مال الفؤاد إلى سواك، ربي لما مال الفؤاد إلى سواك. نادى الحسين مخضبا في كربلاء، حسن البلاء يا مليكا للسماء. إلى كربلاء نادى الحسين مخضبا في كربلاء، حسن البلاء بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه فجعلناه سميعا بصيرا إنا هديناه السبيل إما شاكرا وإما كفورا إنا أعتدنا للكافرين سلاسل وأغلالا وسعيرا إن الأبرار يشربون من كأس كان مزاجها كافورا عينا يشرب بها عباد الله يفجرونها تفجيرا يوفون بالنذر ويخافون يوما كان شره مستطيرا ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا إنا نخاف من ربنا يوما عبوسا قمطريرا فوقاهم الله شر ذلك اليوم ولقاهم نضرة وسرورا وجزاهم بما صبروا جنة وحريرا متكئين فيها على الأرائك لا يرون فيها شمسا ولا زمهريرا ودانية عليهم ظلالها وظللت قطوفها تظليلا ويطاف عليهم بآنية من فضة وأكواب كانت قوارير من فضة قدروها تقديرا صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
أفلح من أعاد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. وثانية لتعجيل فرج الإمام المهدي. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Our respected scholar and dear families, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon Hussain, upon Ali, son of Hussain, upon the children of Hussain, and upon the companions of Hussain alayhi salam. Let us begin this evening with our nightly dua for those who remember it from the nights before. Please join me in asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase our faith in today's battle of faith through the following excerpt from Imam Mahdi's dua. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma arzuqna tawfiq al-ta'a wa bu'd al-ma'siyah wa sidq al-niyyah wa arfan al-hurmah wa akrimna bil-huda wal-istiqamah wa saddid al-sinatana bil-sawab wal-hikmah wa amla' qulubana bil-ilm wal-ma'rifah برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Please help me welcome Sayyid Ali al-Musawi to the podium with a loud salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من شر الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Last night we began discussing the topic of evolution. And we went over this idea that in the 1850s, after many centuries, where the idea of the creation of a human being was simply that God had created him directly, an individual rose up who had this idea that based upon the evidence that we are finding, it seems as if all life on the face of this earth, it has a common point of origin. And so the implication of this, it was that if we go back a little bit in time in our evolutionary history, it wasn't that we have been created directly by God, rather that there was a process of evolution through which we were created. And the implication of this was that in our ancestry, we share a common lineage with primates. As this idea begins to spread throughout the Christian world, it is accepted by the Christian world, it spreads throughout the Muslim world, Muslims begin to grapple that we have Quranic verses that are causing us issues. That when we read the Quranic verses and we understand the Quranic verses, it seems as if they are saying that God directly created mankind, Bani Adam alayhi salam. And so when they begin to analyze the verses, they came up with a few conclusions, and modern day scholars, they've essentially come up with the idea that even if we accept evolution, and we say that this theory is accurate in that everything on this earth has a common point of origin, they say even despite this, all of the evidence points to Adam alayhi salam as having been a distinct creation. And I mentioned 3 points which, if we are to accept evolution wholesale, it causes us issues. That number one, when we look at the story of Habil and Qabil, we find that one of them was a farmer. Whereas when we look at the first incidents of Homo sapiens, who should be the first Adam, we find that Homo sapiens appeared 200,000 years ago, while agriculture, it is something that has only existed for the past 10,000 years. That was number one. Number two was the fact that when you look at the Quranic story of Qabil killing Habil, his brother, what we find is that Qabil, he doesn't know about the custom of burial. Whereas when we look at the fossil record, what we find is that burials have been happening long before Homo sapiens. When we look amongst Neanderthals, before Neanderthals, we find that for a very long period of time, these human-like beings that we mentioned were nasnas, they knew about burial. They would bury one another. They would even put objects within the graves of one another to help them in the afterlife. And so how is it that if Adam alayhi salam and his children were the first of the Homo sapiens, they came about 200,000 years ago, how is it that Allah had to send a crow to teach Qabil about burial? And the third point that we mentioned is that when you look at the malaika, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that, oh my malaika, I am going to be placing this individual, this being, and I'm going to be making him my vicegerent, my khalif on the face of the earth. The malaika, they ask that question from Allah, that, oh Allah, but this is a being that sheds blood and it causes corruption on the face of the earth. How was it that the malaika, they knew that Adam alayhi salam is going to, for example, cause corruption and shed blood? And so the ulama, one of the theories that they have brought together, they've looked at the fossil record, they've looked at the Quranic verses, they have looked at the ahadith, they've thought about this issue deeply. They have said that even if we believe that evolution was what caused the creation of much of the animal life on this earth, and even the human-like beings that came before us, and even if it was the cause of some of the Homo sapiens, when we look at the creation of Adam alayhi salam, it appears that Adam's creation was a distinct and special creation. Yes, Adam alayhi salam may have resembled in some degree those previous beings that existed in the past, but there was something unique about him, something that made him worthy of being Allah's Khalif on the face of this earth. I just wanted to recap this, inshallah, from last night's lecture. And moving forward, tonight's lecture is going to be, at least for myself, it's going to be a very difficult lecture. It's a little bit of a sensitive topic. But I feel that it's a very important topic, and it's one that we need to tackle and we need to discuss, and we need to have a deeper knowledge of this issue. When we look at the verses of the Holy Quran, one of the things that we find is that the Quran is filled with stories of past nations and past prophets. You open the pages of the Quran and immediately Allah begins to weave stories that in the past there was this prophet and he went through these kinds of issues. And in the past there was, for example, this group of people and they went through these kinds of issues. A question that arises is that why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He reveals the Quran to me and you, why is it that He simply didn't reveal a book of do's and don'ts? He very easily could have done this. He could have said that this is halal, this is wajib, you need to go towards these things. And He could have said that these things are haram, you need to avoid these things. If you go towards them, you're going to be harmed. But Allah doesn't do this. He doesn't just give us a book of do's and don'ts. Rather, He gives us a book that is filled with the stories of these past groups of people. And He shows us, practically speaking, what happens to us if we obey the divine laws and what happens to us if we disobey the divine laws. You see, as human beings, usually if our parents told us, don't do this, how would we react towards them? We would usually ask the question, but why? I want to do it. Why are you telling me that I shouldn't do it? We want to know what happens practically if we do this thing. Even a child, you tell him that, Baba, I don't want you to go towards the stove when it's on. He doesn't understand. He wants to see the practical implications of what happens when he puts his hand in the fire. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He does a mercy to us. And He shows us practically through past groups of human beings that when you go down a certain path, this is going to be what ends up taking place to the society. Now, when we are looking at the stories of these Anbiya, one of the things that you're going to notice is that within the Muslim community, when we look at the names that we give our children, we find the names of most of these Anbiya. In fact, we can say that almost all of them are reflected within our communities. Most of you will know at least one or two Musas. Many of you will know at least one Isa. Many of you will know at least one Ayyub, one Yunus. We find that these names are reflected, even though, of course, they are not as common as the names of Muhammad and Ali and Fatima and Hassan. These are more common in our communities. Of one prophet, and that is going to be the prophet that we are discussing tonight, that you will never find even a single individual that is willing to name their child after him. And this is none other than Nabi Lut alayhi salam. Nabi Lut, I always, when I think about him, I feel a sense of sorrow. I have really a soft spot in my heart for him. Because if you look at all of the prophets of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just imagine, He turns to them and He says that I am going to be sending you on a mission. They say, Ya Allah, we obey. What is the mission? Allah, for example, He tells them that there's a group of people, they are worshiping idols in this part of the world. Your job is to go and to fix this issue, to rectify the problem. They say, okay, no problem. They go to that group of people, they live amongst them, and they try to fix that issue of idol worship amongst them. They have to argue with them and say that you shouldn't worship pieces of stone and wood. Nabi Lut alayhi salam, Allah, He turns towards them and He says, I am sending you on a mission. What is the mission, Ya Allah? There is a group of people that are practicing an abomination. Not only am I sending you to them, you have to go and you have to live amongst them for decades. Every city in the US, at least where I'm from in California, we have a place where it is the epicenter of that community. You couldn't pay me enough money to go live in that community just because of the fasad and the corruption that is prevalent there. You don't feel safe. You don't feel that your children are safe. But imagine this prophet of God, he gets sent to the epicenter of the fasad. Not only is he sent there, he has to live there for multiple decades. This is such a tremendous burden. And then as reward for what he has been sent to do, in our own communities, you won't find a single person who names their children after him. In fact, we even do him the disservice whenever we want to refer to that community, we say Qawm Lut. We don't say Qawm Musa, we don't say Qawm Nuh, we don't say Qawm Isa. We don't say any of these things, but when it comes to this poor prophet of God, we say Qawm Lut. It is the people of Lut. And so I always feel this sense of sorrow whenever I'm looking at the story of Nabi Lut alayhi salam. Now, before we begin, I'm going to mention a few points. Number one, I'm going to be censoring some parts of the story. And the reason is that if there was a rating system, this would break the rating system. And so for the sake of myself, for the sake of the audience, I will be censoring, I'll use some euphemisms. If you want to know the entirety of the story, there is an excellent book by the name of God's Emissaries, written by Sheikh Ridwan Arastu, and it's an excellent book. I highly recommend every single one of you purchase this book. If you're savvy, maybe download it. There's a PDF version. It has the story of all of the prophets of God, beginning with Prophet Adam alayhi salam, and it continues until the story of Nabi Isa alayhi salam. And it has within it the complete story of Nabi Lut. So if you want the full unabridged version, it's there. I mean, it's not that bad. But for the sake of the speech, for the sake of the audience, I will be cutting some parts out of it, inshallah. That was point number one. Point number two is that this speech is going to have two components. Component one is that we are going to be going over the story of Nabi Lut and what happens to him. The second component is that we're going to be breaking down the story that we went over, and we're going to be analyzing some of the key questions that you are going to be asked, or that, for example, have come up living in this society that we are living in. So there's going to be these two components. Let's begin, inshallah, with the story of Nabi Lut alayhi salam with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we look at the story of Nabi Lut alayhi salam, the story of Nabi Lut is actually intertwined with the story of Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. Usually when we think about the stories of the prophets, we think of them as individuals that each are having their own role and their own jobs. But what we find with this particular story is that Nabi Lut and Nabi Ibrahim were actually cousins with one another. And the wife of Nabi Ibrahim is actually the sister of Nabi Lut. So from the very beginning, these two, they have a very close relationship. And when Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, he is in the city which is known as Kufa, and he is trying to administer to the people, he's trying to teach to the people that idol worship is an abomination. I'm sure you know the famous story where he's in the city and he realizes that there is a idol temple which is filled with all of the idols of the people of Kufa. Nabi Lut alayhi salam was actually helping him to plan that operation. And so Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, he makes the determination that he's going to wait until a day of Eid for his people when everyone has left the city. He's going to go inside of that temple which is filled with all of these different idols. He's going to take an axe and he is going to go to town on all of these idols. He takes the axe, he begins to destroy all of the idols until he reaches the largest of the idols. When he reaches the largest of the idols, he pauses. He pauses and he takes the axe and he places the axe on the body of the largest idol. Now, Nabi Lut alayhi salam helped him to plan out this operation. And when the people, they come back, they say, who could have done this horrible thing? They say that it had to be none other than that youth known as Ibrahim. He's always speaking ill of our gods and he's telling us that they're not real and that they can't do anything and that they have no powers. So they call upon Ibrahim, they say, come here. Ibrahim comes, they say, Ibrahim, we know that it was you who did this. Ibrahim, he looks, he says, you know, if we're going to be honest here, I'm looking at these idols, all of them have been destroyed, but the largest one, you know, the muscular one, the one that is the most powerful of them all, he seems to be the one standing. Not only is he standing, he also has an axe in his hands. So he says, it must have been that one. The people, they turn to him and they say, Ibrahim, you know very well that these idols, they can't move, they can't do anything, they can't have any power over doing something like this. And so Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam and Nabi Lut, who is alongside him, they're arguing with the people and eventually they get thrown, Nabi Ibrahim gets thrown into the fire, and when that doesn't burn him, they are exiled outside of the city. Now, Nabi Ibrahim and Nabi Lut, they are trying to decide, we've been exiled from the city of Kufa, where should we decide to go next? So they're looking at the geography, at the different cities, and they decide to go to a city that is known today as Hebron, or in the Arabic language, it is known as Al-Khalil. It's named Al-Khalil after the name of Ibrahim. And so they decide that we're going to go to this city of Al-Khalil, we're going to make this our home. Now a question arises here. Why does Ibrahim alayhi salam and Lut, why do they decide to go to the city of Al-Khalil? Why do they decide to go to Hebron? The answer is that when they look at the city of Al-Khalil, they see that it has a very strategic position. During that time period, if you looked, there were cities through which trade routes would travel. And so imagine if you are a prophet of God and your job is doing tabligh, your job is to spread the religion of Islam. If you could begin to do tabligh in a city like that where all of these caravans are coming, they are going from south to north and north to south and east to west. If you could connect with these travelers and tell them about Allah and about Islam, then even if they didn't accept the religion of Islam, which some of them would, they would still take those ideas and they would take those concepts far and wide. So even when they return to, for example, their cities, they would say that there is this prophet of God named Ibrahim. He believes in one God. These are his teachings. And so Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, they situate themselves in Al-Khalil, and Nabi Lut is there with them, and they begin to propagate the religion of Islam. Whenever travelers come, they are teaching them about this religion. Now, there is a key point that I wanted to bring up here, that when you look at every prophet of God throughout history, they had a simple job description. And that was the job description of tabligh. Meaning that they would try to propagate the religion of Islam to as many people and in as many ways as they felt was effective. As Shias, one of the questions that people sometimes ask me is, why is it that we Shias, we don't do any tabligh? Why is it that we are one of the quietest schools of thought when it comes to the issue of propagating the religion of Islam? And it's a genuine question that if you look, probably the most active religion is the Salafiyya, the Wahhabiyya. They are the most active. Every city that you go, they have booths and tables and they have pamphlets. And maybe every weekend or even every single day, they have a table out in different parks and they are trying to bring people towards the religion of Islam. But as Shias who follow the prophets of God, why is it that we are lacking in this department? Of course, it has a very logical answer, that as Shias, as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, if you go back and you look at the history that we have, it wasn't as if we were free to go out into the streets and call people to the path of the Ahlul Bayt. What would happen if someone did this? If you called people to the path of the Ahlul Bayt, forget about calling people to the path. If they even knew that you were a lover of the Ahlul Bayt, they would hunt you down, they would kill you, they would take your property, and they would completely destroy your life. Now, today, in some of the countries, it's still like this. Alhamdulillah, here in America, we don't have this issue. But if you're from Pakistan, if you are from Afghanistan, we still have assassinations of the Shia. If you are a Shia, if you are well known, you are a key figure in the community, they will actually come and they will assassinate you. But there is a lesson in this for us, that if the job of the Anbiya and the job of the Ahlul Bayt, it was the propagation of the religion of Islam, we should do better. We should do better. We should have every masjid should have at least a department, at least a few people whose job is to somehow propagate, to whatever capacity that we have, propagate the religion of Islam, propagate tashayyu. If you don't see 20, 30, 40 new faces in the masjid, converts, in a country where people are so thirsty for religion. You know, when I look at the history of cults in this country, people are so thirsty for spirituality and religion and meaning that they will join the craziest of cults. There's a vacuum here. There's an opportunity here. And so this is a tremendous opportunity that every center, if even a few brothers, a few sisters, they educate themselves on tabligh, on how to go out there and connect with people. There's a huge opportunity, inshallah, of bringing people into the mercy of Allah. So these prophets of God, they are in the city of Hebron, they're propagating the religion. And as they are propagating the religion, word comes to Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam that there is a city in which the people have become corrupted. Now, what was the name of the city? The name of the city was Sodom. If we look at Sodom, it's actually, historically, it's actually 4 cities. And each of these cities, they were right next to one another, and they had distinct names, but they were essentially considered to be confederate cities. They had the same people and the same culture and the same language. So Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam, he deputizes. On behalf of Allah, he sends Nabi Lut alayhi salam. He says that Allah wants you to go to the city of Sodom, and you are supposed to go and you are supposed to try to bring these people out of this abomination and sin that they are engaged in. Now, you might be wondering, how did the people of Sodom, how did they fall into this sin? Because the history of how they fell into the sin is a fascinating history. When we look at the original history of Sodom, when you look at the ahadith that we have, the Ahlul Bayt, they've explained the entire details of what happened. They have said that in the very beginning, the people of Sodom, they were actually a very good group of people. One of the characteristics that they were known by was that they were incredibly generous with people that were traveling as well as the poor. So if you were a traveler during that time period and you happened to be close to the cities of Sodom, you would definitely go there, because one of the things that they were known to do is that whenever the poor came, whenever the travelers came, they would feed them for the sake of Allah. You know, sometimes we hold back. We are not generous when it comes to other people. The people of Sodom were incredibly generous. And so it became a hub of travel that not only would the poor flock to the city of Sodom, but also those that were traveling, they would also go there. And so as a result of that generous nature that the people had, what ends up happening is that Allah increases them in the blessings. Allah gives them even more, and so Sodom becomes an incredibly wealthy place. Eventually, after we don't know how many decades, how many centuries, maybe even longer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He decides that I'm going to test the people of Sodom. You know, it's one thing, my brothers and sisters, to be generous when the money is flowing. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where money just keeps coming. It just keeps coming. It's very easy for you to say Alhamdulillah and to put your hand into your pocket and to give it to those who are in need. It's very easy because you know that it's coming, it's continuous. The real question of who we are as human beings, the real question of whether I have an actual generous nature within myself, is what I do when times are tough. And believe me, Allah is going to test each and every one of us. That we may be a person of good akhlaq, maybe in a certain situation. Allah may test us with a little bit of difficulty to see if we can maintain that good akhlaq. We may be a person known for their generosity because we have wealth. Allah may decide to test us by tightening those purse strings to see how we behave when the money is not flowing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He decides that He is going to test the people of Sodom. And so what He does is He sends down a drought, and that drought, it begins to take away some of the crops which they had. They were a group of people with orchards and farms. Alhamdulillah, they had enough for themselves. They had enough where they could eat and they could subsist. But the drought causes a little bit of tightening of the resources. Now, the poverty-stricken, they still are coming because of the reputation of Sodom. The travelers, they continue to come because of the reputation of Sodom. But what ends up happening is that when they see that the Sodomites are no longer generous, they're no longer giving to the poor and to the guests, these individuals who are traveling through, they say, okay, well, we have all of these crops. Let us take from these crops and then we'll use these crops for ourselves. So they end up stealing and pilfering from the crops of the Sodomites. Now, here, Shaitan, he comes down. And narrations, they mention that he comes in the form of a man. We don't know whether it was actually Shaitan who takes on human form or whether it was an individual whose ideas were satanic. Sometimes you have an individual whose ideas are so satanic that even Shaitan becomes ashamed. This individual, he gives a suggestion. He says that these individuals that are coming and they are pilfering, they are taking from your wealth. It's not like you have surplus and you have extras. He gives them a suggestion that you should attack them and you should do something to them. Now here we're going to, again, as I mentioned, we're going to censor. He says that you should attack them, you should assault them. Now, when the people of Sodom, this good group of people. They are religious. They are good-natured. They're just going through this test. They are disgusted by this suggestion. They say, old man, how could you say such a horrible thing? What is this? But what Shaitan had done is that he had planted a seed. He had planted an idea in the minds of the people of Sodom that if you want this to stop, here's a solution. The pilfering continues. People continue to come, they continue to steal. And eventually, what happens is that it becomes a custom amongst the people of Sodom that whenever they would catch travelers who would come into the city, as a warning, as a way of teaching them you shouldn't do this, they would attack them in this way. Now, of course, after a very short period of time, the pilfering stops. So definitely it works. But when it stops, these individuals who now have this satanic practice amongst one another, they begin to practice it amongst one another. And so the entire culture of homosexuality, it begins to spread amongst the people of Sodom. It becomes part and parcel of who they are. Now, when we look at the ahadith, there's something amazing that the ahadith mention, that as they fall into this grave sin, many things begin to change about the people of Sodom. Before this practice, if you looked at the people of Sodom, if you had traveled throughout their city, you would have seen a people who dressed very modestly. So their way of dress was very modest. They would cover much of their bodies, male as well as female. But after they begin to engage in this sin, their dress begins to change. So the ahadith mentioned that if they would cover both of their shoulders with their robes, now they would leave one shoulder open. If they had clothing which would conceal their bodies, they would begin to wear translucent clothing. One of the things that is mentioned, and this is maybe for the brothers, one of the things that they begin to do is they begin to unbutton the buttons of their shirts. They would leave the top buttons open. I think after this, the brothers are going to have an extra button. They're going to be complete. This was one of the characteristics, this is one of the things that the hadith mentioned, that they would open these buttons, revealing their chest. The way that they would behave with one another changes. Before, when they looked at one another, they were modest and they're looking. Now, they would begin to leer at one another. Just imagine how much of a change has come across the society as a result of one sin. The issue of hygiene, and this is unbelievable, they even stopped bathing. They even stopped bathing. That basic hygiene, basic cleanliness. The ahadith mentions that they even stop performing basic hygiene. So just, when I say I feel sorry for Nabi Lut alayhi salam, imagine that he is being commissioned and he's being sent into a group of people who are like this. And so when Nabi Lut alayhi salam, he enters into the city of Sodom, he is shocked beyond belief to see the condition of these people. These had been good people, and in a period of time they had changed and they had transformed completely. Nabi Lut alayhi salam, he enters into the city of Sodom, he introduces himself. The first thing that he notices is that people are leering at him as well. They see that he is new, and he introduces himself as the cousin of Nabi Ibrahim. They say, who is Ibrahim? He says, that individual that was thrown into the fire and he didn't burn. So he's introducing himself as an individual with great power. And so as a result of this, the people of Sodom, they leave him alone. They don't attack him, they leave him alone. Nabi Lut alayhi salam, he finds a place of residence, he finds a home there. He even ends up marrying a woman from the city of Sodom who believed in his message. So a woman by the name of Qiwab, she accepts his teaching and his preaching, and she comes, and he eventually weds her. And so Nabi Lut, for the next 33 years, he is trying to teach the people that what you are doing is wrong. Now, this is an unbelievably difficult job. If it was one of us, imagine that you are sent to a place like Sodom, and you are trying to explain to the people that this sin is a grave sin, you shouldn't commit it, the reasons X, Y, and Z, and the people are not listening to you. How long would you last there? Maybe I would last 1 week and I say, Ya Allah, I can't do it, I have to leave. Nabi Lut alayhi salam, 33 years, he is doing tabligh to these people. And eventually, he reaches the point where he realizes that these people are not going to change. Now, inshallah, this is enough. I'm going to stop at this point. I'd like to leave a little bit of a cliffhanger of what happens next. And inshallah, we're going to continue with the story as well as some of the points which we can extract from this story, some of the practical implications of how this story relates to us today, inshallah, tomorrow night. We raise our hands in dua. We ask that Allah forgives us our sins in this holy month of Muharram, and that He guides us and that He protects not only us, but our progeny as well from every kind of sin. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So they had also mentioned that we are going to begin doing a component of Q&A. I believe there is an online portal for those of you who have any questions, whether it's related to the topics that we've been going over, or whether it's related to other topics. If anyone has questions, I think there's that online portal that you could ask them anonymously. And inshallah, from those questions, we will gather and we will answer the easiest ones. That's usually how it works, if I'm going to be honest. No, we'll answer, inshallah, all of them that are relevant and they're beneficial, inshallah. So I think the first question that had been asked was the question that, if I remember correctly, someone was saying that if I am in a haram relationship, what do I do? So sometimes as believers, we find ourselves in a situation that we don't want to be. We made some mistakes, and we are now in this very emotionally charged relationship, and we know that it is haram, but we're trying to figure out how to get out of it. So number one, I'm just going to mention a few practical points. Number one, we have to recognize that whatever Allah has made haram, He has mentioned that it is haram because it is harmful to us. Sometimes we have the opposite idea. We think that Allah has made something haram almost as a test and a trial. That something is a lot of fun, and then Allah, He says that I want to see what level of faith you have, and I don't want you to do that fun action. I don't want you to be in that fun place. But the reality is that everything which is halal and everything that is haram, it's literally a guideline. Allah is saying that if you want to have maximal happiness, if you want to have minimal problems in this dunya, then I want you to do these things and I want you to avoid these things. And what is haram is essentially that action that it damages our soul. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's created us as body and soul. And within that soul, anything that is haram, it literally causes damage. If I want to give an example, imagine that you have a vial of poison. If you drink it, let's say you won't die, but you're going to get violently sick for the next couple of days. Haram is literally the same. We are causing damage and breakage to our soul. And that damage, it doesn't allow us to connect with Allah. It doesn't allow us to be at peace. So this is the first thing, that whenever you look at the halal and the haram, we have to look at it from the correct perspective. So back to the question that we are in this difficult situation. We have gotten ourselves into a haram relationship. Number one, we need to step away from that haram relationship. So regardless of the emotions that are involved, you need to step away. The second question that you need to ask yourself is that what I am doing right now, this is not permissible and it's not good for me or the other person. It's not going to lead to anything beneficial. So the second question is that I've made this mistake, they've made this mistake. What is the solution now? Number one, it's possible that you can decide that this individual would not make a good life partner. In that case, you need to break it completely. As difficult as it is, the emotional charge, you do need to break that relationship. But if you feel that no, this individual would make a good life partner, we've both made some mistakes, but I see valuable characteristics in this person. He or she, for example, would make a good husband, a good wife, a good mother, a good father. They have good characteristics, they're religious. If you can see that within that person, then I would suggest bringing in the elders, and this is very important, that sometimes the youth, they try to get into relationships. They try to go around their parents, and first they establish a relationship, then they bring in the parents. This is a mistake. As soon as you see someone that is suitable for you, the first step is in reality to bring in the elders. Because if you don't bring in the elders, no matter what you do or what you say, that relationship is never going to be long-lasting. And so at this point, if you find that that person is a good prospective partner in the future, then bring in the parents, make that relationship halal. And Islam makes marriage extremely easy. It makes it extremely easy. That we don't even need, in Sunni Islam, you actually need witnesses. In Shia Islam, it's really a very simple. You have a sheikh, he recites the aqd, and you are married. So sometimes we complicate things and we have all these other ceremonies. In order to make that relationship halal, it's very simple that you involve the parents, you involve the shuyukh, and very quickly and very easily they can convert what is harmful for our souls into one of the greatest blessings and one of the greatest means of growth for ourselves. So inshallah, I hope that answers the question. If anyone has any further questions, again, on this topic of the story, I was going to say Qawm Lut, but I felt bad, the story of Nabi Lut alayhi salam, or any of the other topics that we've done, or even other things, inshallah, feel free to ask those questions, and we will do our best to answer them. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
ثالثة لتعجيل فرج مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان. Before we begin our majlis, inshallah, we share a small announcement, and that is the Al-Qasim Youth Contest, which is an educational online questionnaire for youth of ages 8 to 14. The contest form will be available at the hall entrance, and all forms must be submitted via the collection boxes and prior to Friday, July 30th. 5 winners will be announced after Arba'een, inshallah. We encourage you all, or encourage our youth to participate, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To you, I have come, a deputy of Hussain. To you I have come, a deputy of Hussain, to remind you of your oaths, your pledges not be in vain. I arrive amongst you after the letters you sent. How unfortunate my time amongst you is that I spent. Allahu Akbar, I raise my hands. Allahu Akbar, I raise my hands in Kufa to pray, only to find that alone in the mosque I stay. Did you not hear the verse of the Holy Quran? O you who believe, to God's caller respond. I warn you on behalf of him. I warn you on behalf of him. Inni lakum minhu nadhir. Let not Ibn Ziyad put you all in fear. The breaking of covenants is a sin God loathes. He vows to punish the oppressor and the complicit both. And know well, even if a warrior is thrown off a tower, his truth rises after him in God's might and power. And never is the truth to be buried below. Where's Hussain and where's Yazid? You will surely know. Please help me welcome the reciter of the Hussaini Majlis, Brother Hassan Bazzoon, with a loud salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
لتعجيل فرج مولانا صاحب الزمان رحم الله من أعاد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى آلك المظلومين أعظم الله أجوركم يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا صاحب الزمان صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا أبا عبد الله وعلى ابن عمك مسلم بن عقيل. May the peace of Allah fall upon the benevolent heart of Imam Hussain. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah, as you are His vast mercy and the salvation of this ummah. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah, and upon your entrusted cousin, Muslim ibn Aqil. Together, a stranger you were in Karbala, ya thirsty you were in Karbala, ya martyred you fell in Karbala, ya remember a man known to be brave. For Hussain, his life he gave. Yalla to Karbala, to Imam Hussain alayhi salam, to console the heart of Sayyida Fatima and our 12th Imam, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif. Together. Remember a man known to be brave. For Hussain, his life he gave. Without fear, he bravely fought. Alone in Kufa, with a painful thought. What will be when Hussain arrives? How will he receive their lives? Betrayed, I'm killed, Ya Hussain. Betrayed, I'm killed, don't arise. Assalamu alayka, Aba Abdullah. Brothers and sisters, before we go into the musibah, it's important for us to understand how Muslim ends up in Kufa and how he is killed, because this is the final and perhaps the most important catalyst that leads to the death of Imam Hussain, to him being stranded and martyred in Karbala. After Imam Hussain alayhi salam rejected his allegiance to Yazid and the news was spreading, and he had arrived from Medina to Mecca, people, especially the elders of the tribes in Kufa who had allegiance to Imam Ali alayhi salam, began sending letters and correspondence to the Imam, asking him to come to them and come to their aid and to rescue them from the Umayyad rule. Amongst other things, I do not want to give a lecture, I just want to tell the historical context. Many of the letters start coming to Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and the Imam assesses the situation. In some of these letters, they tell the Imam, we pray that Allah brings us to truth through you, and we will not uphold Salat al-Jum'ah nor go to Eid prayers until you are the one leading these types of prayers. In other letters they said, أما بعد فإن الناس ينتظرونك ولا رأي لهم غيرك. People have made a decision to follow you, Ya Hussein, and they have no opinion in anyone else. So hurry and hurry. Al-ajal thumma al-ajal. They would say to Imam Hussein, they wrote to him, Al-ajal thumma al-ajal. And in other letters, أما بعد فقد اخضر الجناب وأينعت الثمار فإذا شئت فأقدم على جند لك مجندة. And many of these letters were written by people who ended up fighting Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And I'll translate the last one. The time of harvest has come. So if you wish, come to us, and you shall find armed warriors at your service. Upon receiving these letters and assessing the situation and knowing that Yazid has ordered the death of Imam Hussain even if he is holding on to the garbs of the Kaaba, Imam Hussain considered going to Kufa on this mission. But he appointed his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil. And Muslim ibn Aqil was a heavyweight from Bani Hashim. He had fought with Imam Ali alayhi salam, with Imam al-Hassan. He was a alim, a scholar in the faith, a warrior, a commander of war, brave, kind. And so when Imam Hussain alayhi salam writes a letter and he hands it to Muslim and he sends him to Kufa, he writes in the letters, ألا وإني باعث إليكم بأخي وابن عمي وثقتي من أهل بيتي. I am indeed sending you my brother and cousin and my trustee from amongst my Ahlul Bayt, from amongst my family. He described them as a trustee. And Muslim was to go to Kufa and to assess the allegiance and the letters that were being given to the Imam. And if he finds that that is truly the case, then he would start preparing for the movement of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And when Muslim arrived in Kufa, he first resided in the house of Al-Mukhtar al-Thaqafi. And at that time, the governor of Kufa was Al-Nu'man ibn al-Bashir. And Nu'man was not very strict. He was an Umayyad governor, but he was not very strict. And so Muslim began moving, especially with the protection of and the help of Al-Mukhtar and Hani ibn Urwa. And he started meeting with the tribesmen and the elderly men and validating the allegiance of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And they would come and they would swear their allegiance, and they were organizing battalions to help protect and defend the Imam. And eventually Muslim was looking at a list of thousands of men, perhaps 18,000, 14,000, the numbers vary, who had given their allegiance to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And so he writes a letter to Imam Hussain alayhi salam saying, أما بعد فإن الرائد لا يكذب أهله وقد بايعني من الكوفة 18,000. He says the scout does not lie to his family. and 18,000 of the people of Kufa have pledged allegiance to me. And that means they pledged allegiance to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. So he says, so come when my letter arrives to you. And as Muslims' strength in Kufa became more apparent and was growing, Yazid was informed, and he sent a letter to Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad, who was known to be ruthless, vicious, heartless, godless. And he tells Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad to convey the urgency. He says, if you have wings, then fly to Kufa and remove An-Nu'man from power and take over and control the city. And so Ibn Ziyad arrives in Kufa in an entourage of soldiers, and they remove Nu'man from power. He assigns men who are loyal to him to control the military, the police, and the money. And then he begins spreading rumors and also threats that whoever stands with Muslim or with Hussein or loves these people or associates with them will be killed when the army of Sham arrives. And they start brutally cracking down on the followers or the people who gave their allegiance to Imam Hussein. And they also start giving away rewards and money for those who turn in their swords and who agree not to fight or not to join any movements and not to support Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And at this time, Muslim moves from the residence of Al-Mukhtar to the residence of Hani ibn Urwa. And in the house of Hani, Muslim is protected. So Ubaidullah, to get to Muslim, he knows he cannot just raid the house of Hani. Hani comes from a big tribe with thousands of soldiers. And so he sends after Hani. And they tell him, the Amir, la'anahullah, the Amir has called for you to come to the castle. And we give you safety, meaning you will come and you will not be harmed. And so Hani comes to the castle. He's forced to go to the castle, where Ubaidullah holds him and does not release him. And then eventually Hani ibn Urwa is killed. And the thousands of men who were with Hani from his family do not fight, because some of them are manipulated, some of them are bribed, and some of them are told, oh, Hani is just visiting and he will stay for a few nights in the palace of Ibn Ziyad. And so now the situation is changing. And Muslim has already sent his letter to Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And some of the elders and tribesmen who gave their allegiance to Muslim betray, or they weaken, or they come up with excuses like, we will draw our swords. We support you, Muslim, but we will only draw our swords when Hussein is here. We will not draw our swords for the representative of Hussein. But Muslim gathers a couple thousand men, and they go to the palace, the castle of Ibn Ziyad. They surround it and they want to bring Hani out. They want the release of Hani. So Ibn Ziyad summons a judge who was also bribed, and he comes out and he speaks to the soldiers, the tribesmen from Hani's tribe, and he tells them, I bear witness that Hani is okay, and take my word for it, I'm a pious judge. Leave now, and Hani will be coming to you soon. At this time, what was happening to Hani? He was being tortured and beaten. And so the situation quickly deteriorates. And that day, after Muslim having a big crowd and the rumors are spreading and people are being afraid, and some are interested in the rewards, and some are saying we shouldn't get involved in the politics, and let Hussein and Yazid figure it out. Who are we? And they are kings and we are regular laymen. Muslim goes from being a leader of a large group of men to being with maybe 20, 30 followers. And that group, some of it dissipated, some of them were broken apart. Kufa was a big city. Some of them left, like Muslim ibn Awsaja, for example, when they were separated in the chaos and in the streets, left Kufa and made their way to Karbala to join Imam Hussain alayhi salam there. But ultimately, Muslim is now with a very small group, and they go to pray Salat al-Maghrib wal-Isha. And the narrations say that by the time Muslim was done with Salat al-Maghrib wal-Isha and he left the mosque, he found himself alone in the streets of Kufa. Assalamu alayka ya Muslim. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Yes, Muslim finds himself alone in the streets of Kufa. And after a long day and being in a big city with nowhere to go, he starts walking in the alleys. As he's walking, it's dark, there's a curfew, people are under military control, people are not allowed to be out in the streets. Ibn Ziyad is running Kufa now with an iron fist. So Muslim is walking and the streets are hollow. And as he's walking, he finds an elderly lady standing in front of her door. She's waiting for her son. She has a son who is a fasiq and she's waiting for him. So he stops. He says, Assalamu alayki ya amat Allah. She says, Wa alaykum assalam. How can I help you? He says, do you have a drink of water? I am thirsty. Her name was Taw'a. Taw'a says yes. She goes inside, brings him water, and Muslim drinks. Then he stands. So she says, didn't you drink? He says yes. She says, then why are you standing in front of my door? Go to your family, go to your home. Muslim doesn't say anything. She says again, please do not stand in front of my door. It's not proper. So Muslim tells her, أمة الله ليس لي في هذا المصر منزل. I do not have a family or a house in this city. I'm a stranger. Would you do me a favor and I will pay it back to you on the day of judgment? She says, on the day of judgment, why? Who are you to say that you're going to pay me back on the day of judgment? Ya Taw'a, I'm a stranger in your town. Without friends, I walk around. Help me today so I may now hide. Yes, the narration said that Muslim was trying now to cover himself, protect himself until he finds a way out and goes to meet Imam Hussain alayhi salam. Help me today so I may hide, then find my way back to Hussein's side, and warn him that Kufa has turned. So ya Hussein, to Mecca return. But alas, alas, it's been decreed that I, like Hussein, will bleed. He says, I am Muslim ibn Aqil. Ali ibn Abi Talib is my uncle. Al-Hussein is my cousin. And I am his representative in Kufa. And I have been abandoned by these people. And now I'm a stranger seeking shelter. Taw'a was a lover of Ahl al-Bayt. She goes, you are Muslim? Oh my God, please come inside. She knows that he's a fugitive, so she takes him inside. She has a small room in her house. She hides him in that room. She doesn't want her son to know. And Muslim alayhi salam, Muslim spends that night in worship, and in some narrations they say he fell asleep for a bit and he saw Imam Ali alayhi salam calling him to heaven. When Taw'a's son, after a few hours, comes home, he eventually learns that his mother is hiding Muslim in their house. And so at the break of dawn, he hurries to the castle of Ibn Ziyad, hoping for a large reward. And he tells them where Muslim is hiding. So Ibn Ziyad dispatches his soldiers, and when Muslim hears the sound of their armor and their horses approaching, he prepares himself for battle. He speaks to Taw'a, he says, Rahimakillah wa jazakillahu anni khayra. May Allah grant you mercy and may He reward your assistance to me. Then the soldiers, they try to break into the house, but Muslim was a very strong warrior. He begins to fight. He fights them off bravely and he pushes them outside of the house. And the fight goes to the alleyways and the streets, and the narrations say that Muslim displayed an unmatched level of bravery and strength against these soldiers, and he killed many of them, making it difficult for them to capture him. So what do? They light logs of wood on fire, and they go to the rooftops, and they send archers as well, and other soldiers with stones, and they start waiting for Muslim around the corners, and they throw fire logs at him, and they're hitting him with stones and arrows until eventually Muslim is exhausted. He's exhausted and he cannot fight any longer, but he does not drop his sword. So they come to him and they say, Ya Muslim, we will give you safety, alayka al-aman, but you're captured. Stop fighting us. So eventually Muslim accepts their safety, their lies. They lie to Muslim and they capture Muslim ibn Aqil, and then they shackle him. And when they shackle him, the people gather. The people of Kufa gather. They're witnessing this. Muslim looks around. He looks at himself. He says, Ya Ahl al-Kufa, Ana Muslim ibn Aqil, wayhakum. And there is silence. Then he says, Ya Ahl al-Kufa, uskuni sharbata ma. There's a narration that says this. And that one boy came to offer Muslim ibn Aqil a bowl of water. When Muslim wanted to drink, blood from the wounds of his face dropped into the water, and so he couldn't drink it anymore. It's as if Muslim was decreed by Allah to be martyred thirsty, like his master Abu Abdullah al-Hussain will be in Karbala. Then when Muslim saw the scene and he saw that he's been captured and that no one came and that the people of Kufa have truly surrendered and turned away from Abu Abdullah, he began to cry. So some of the soldiers, they say, Ya Muslim, the one who seeks what you seek should not cry. He says, Inni wallahi ma li nafsi bakat, walakin abki li dhaka al-gharib. By Allah, I'm not crying for myself, I'm crying for the stranger heading towards Kufa, for Hussain who will be betrayed here. Ya Hussain, a Muslim in Kufa betrayed. They broke their word and in the way they strayed. Ya Hussain, turn back to you I plead. Kufa lied, Hani's gone, and wounded I bleed. Then they took Muslim ibn Aqil into the hall of Ibn Ziyad. Muslim stood proud, defiant in the face of this tyrant. One of the soldiers says, "Why don't you greet your commander?" Muslim responds and says, "Be silent. He is no commander of mine." This makes Ibn Ziyad furious. He says, "Whether you greet me or not, you're dead either way." Then he gives the command to his soldiers to strike Muslim's head from the highest tower of the palace. Yes, brothers and sisters, they took Muslim ibn Aqil near the edge of the highest tower. Muslim stood defiant, doing tasbih in his final moments. Then he raised his face and voice towards the sky in dua. Allahumma ahkum baynana wa bayna qawmin gharruna wa khadhaluna. Ya Allah, bring justice between us and these people that deceived us and betrayed us. And in that moment, brothers and sisters, they struck him with a sword on the neck, and the body of Muslim ibn Aqil fell to the ground. Ya Muslim, Ya Muslim, when Hussain was near, your blood was spilled ever so dear. May your soul rest in the heavens above. Oh, first martyr in the journey of love. رحم الله من نادى ومسلما وحبيبا ومظلوما. Brothers and sisters, Ibn Ziyad was not satisfied, and he wanted to make a lesson out of Muslim and Hani ibn Urwa. So he ordered that their bodies be taken. Then they tied them to the horses, and they dragged their bodies around the streets of Kufa, where everyone could see it. Brothers and sisters, another story. When Muslim left Mecca, he had entrusted his kids. He had 2 young boys and 1 young daughter. He left them with Imam Hussain alayhi salam. And they were traveling with the Imam to Kufa, hoping to reunite with their father. But while the Imam was on his way nearing Kufa, in a part of the desert known as Zarud, a messenger came and delivered the news to him of what happened to Muslim. Imam Hussain alayhi salam approaches Sayyida Zainab. He says, عظم الله لك الأجر بابن عمك Muslim. He informs her of the news of the death of Muslim ibn Aqil. Then he says, Ya Zainab, bring me Hamida. Hamida is the young daughter of Muslim ibn Aqil. She may have been 5 or 6 years old. He says, Ya Zainab, bring me Hamida. When Hamida came to Imam Hussain, what does the Imam do? He takes Hamida, he embraces her, he sits her down. Then he wipes over her head with his blessed hands as he holds back his tears. Hamida looks at Imam Hussain alayhi salam. She sees the sorrow in his face. He's wiping her head. She says, Uncle Hussain, why are you wiping my head as you do with the orphans? Is my father okay? Has my father been killed? عمي يا حسين قلبوا يا وانا عمي يا حسين تشنبوا يا قاتلينا. Uncle Hussain, tell me, is my father gone now? Uncle Hussain, am I an orphan now? How does the Imam respond? He says, Habibati Hamida, in the absence of your father, I am your father. And my daughters are your sisters. When she heard these words from the Imam, she began to weep in his embrace, as if her heart was saying to her father, Muslim ibn Aqil, Father, O Muslim, where have you gone? Father, O Muslim, before tomorrow's dawn. Dear Father Muslim, Hussain is here. Dear Father Muslim, holding me near. Tear after tear fell for you, dear Father, O Muslim, I cry in fear, just like Ruqayya and Sukayna, orphans together we shall be. Ya Allah, we ask and call upon you by your greatest name, the mightiest, the most honorable, to send your blessings and praise upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. And that you accept of us our worship. We ask that you send your mercy upon the dead of the believing men and women. We ask you by Hussain, the martyr, and his mother and father and brother, whoever was in this gathering of ours and has a need, that you fulfill it for them. And whoever in this gathering of ours is sick or has a sick loved one, that you heal them. We pray that you relieve the suffering of all those oppressed, especially the people of Palestine. We ask you to deckle the innocent martyrs of Gaza with your mercy and heal the wounds of its survivors. We pray that you bring your aid and victory upon those fighting for justice, and that you bring about the defeat of the Israeli Zionist entity. We ask that you hasten the return of our beloved 12th Imam, Al-Imam Al-Mahdi, Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Faraja. Together. Assalamu ala al-Hussain wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussain wa ala awlad al-Hussain وعلى أصحاب الحسين. السلام على الحوراء زينب أخت الحسين. السلام على أبي الفضل العباس أخي الحسين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. سيدي يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. السلام عليك وعلى جدك المصطفى وأبيك المرتضى وأمك الزهراء وأخيك المجتبى والتسعة المعصومين من بنيك النجبى. السلام عليك وعلى حفيدك الطالب بثارك صاحب العصر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن جميعا صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وإلى أرواح الشهداء والعلماء وأمواتنا جميعا، لا سيما أموات المؤسسين لهذا المجلس، وإلى أرواح أموات من توفى على ولاية علي بن أبي طالب، ولقضاء الحوائج رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل